If Jesus preached a sermon in our church, studies in the Sermon on the Mount, this is part 8, and tonight we're looking at integrity in speech. Integrity in speech. How important are the words that we say? We're used to thinking of actions as things and words not quite in the same category. You speak them, they're invisible. Where do they go after you speak? That last sentence. It's gone. So we don't think of our words as being quite as crucially important as perhaps our Lord may be taught. That's what we're going to look at tonight. Matthew 5, 33 to 37, and then Matthew 23, technically not the Sermon on the Mount, but the same subject dealt with, 16 to 22. Hope you have a Bible with you. Even Sunday night, I hope you have a Bible with you. It's what we do. We study the Word together. Matthew 5:33, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, he's looking at Old Covenant, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. 23:16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, then he's bound by his oath. So what's happening here is they're using oaths not to ensure accuracy of speech. They're using oaths to create loopholes where you don't always have to mean what you say. And this drives Jesus nuts. You blind fools. Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, well, then he's bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. I think you can see Jesus gives all of our words significance. He said they were like the oil dipstick on your car's engine. They show you what's inside the heart. That's what the words reveal. He said that in Matthew 12, 35 to 37. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. Now he explains what he means. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. Ouch. Just think about that sentence. On the day of judgment, people will give account of how many words do you speak in a lifetime? Give an account of every careless word they speak. We're going to have communion. How many are thankful that there's forgiveness and grace? Yeah. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. I said earlier in the introduction, we usually think of our words as somewhat smaller than our acts, and Jesus is saying that's nowhere near the truth. And you notice how Jesus places sins of speech right alongside of breaking marriage vows and taking a life. It's in that category. Let's look at a few things together tonight. Oaths were frequently used in the Bible. Specific examples, they're easy to find. Exodus 22, 10 and 11. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies, or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, by an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath. He shall not make restitution. Notice that this is commanded by God, this oath. Oaths weren't needed before the fall. In the same way, in the Sermon on the Mount, rules about divorce and adultery, they weren't needed before the fall. They became necessary, Jesus said, due to the hardness of hearts. The same with oaths. That's why they had to be introduced by the command of God himself. The idea was to protect man from his neighbor's deception, his neighbor's dishonesty. There had to be some way to at least try to safeguard the truth in fallen people who would be prone to deception and dishonesty. How would you make sure that what they were saying was really valid, really weighty and true? And so, oaths were introduced. For the same reason, all sorts of commandments were introduced, because of the hardness of heart and the need for protection from sinful intent. God introduced them. 2. The whole purpose of the oath had been twisted by the Pharisees. You see it so clearly. I read those words, Matthew 5, 33, 34, 35. This is Jesus preaching. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Jesus tells them, don't use oaths. And the reason he's saying it, because he can see how they're saying, if you swear by this, you really have to perform your words. But if you swear by this, well, it doesn't count quite as much. It's not as weighty. So Jesus says, don't get into this at all. What kind of a game are you playing with the truth? That's what Jesus is saying. So oaths were used in 2 ways, and those ways are reflected in these words we just read from Matthew. First, an oath was used to show that you really would do what you said you would do. That's in that 33rd verse. Shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. So you're really going to do what you say you're going to do. That was one of the purposes of the oath. Secondly, an oath was used to show that the statement you just made was the whole truth. You weren't deceiving anybody. Much like the way an oath is used in a court of law. I'm going to talk about that at the end. So in other words, oaths were used initially to show faithfulness, verse 33. I'll really do it. And honesty. 34 and 35, I'm really telling the truth. I'll really do it. If I say I'll do it, I'll do it. And I'm not lying to you. I'm honest in what I'm saying. So this would reflect the intent of God's commands regarding oaths in those Old Testament passages that I just read earlier. Now, right here, okay, right at this point, you start to see the sin of the people and the fresh teaching from Jesus regarding oaths. As with the other commands, the Pharisees were actually using the letter of the law to undo the intent of the law. They're trying to set up 2 levels of speech, and Jesus watches them do it. It's like the same kind of sin that can be seen in the Old Testament in matters of measurement. I was looking at Deuteronomy 25, 13 to 16. And you can just see what God is shooting for, the sin he's shooting at here, where he says, you shall not have in your bag 2 kinds of weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house 2 kinds of measures, a large and a small. And depending on the circumstances, you'd use whichever one was in your favor at the time. A full and fair weight you shall have, A full and fair measure you shall have, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who act dishonestly, are an abomination to the Lord. So what they were doing with measures and weights, they were doing with their words exactly the same thing. Sometimes they counted a lot. Sometimes they didn't have to count as much, just depending on what they swore by. So our words, you hear Jesus. Our words are to be as just as our measurements. If you went to fill up your car and all of a sudden the price, instead of being per liter, was per ounce, you think, wait a minute, we got to have a way of measuring this accurately. And that's exactly what they were saying about measurements, and that's exactly what Jesus is saying about speech, about our words. Three. Now Jesus is coming to his conclusion in his sermon. The importance of honesty in all of our speech. It's in Matthew 5:37. Let what you say be simply yes or no. And then he's looking right at the Pharisees. Anything more than this comes from evil. You're just playing a game. It's a con. Just yes means yes, no means no, and make sure it's always that way, consistent. And you can see Jesus fighting fiercely for integrity in all speech. Sworn speech, unsworn speech. It all has to be honest. Even when it doesn't include some special formula. Jesus wants all disciples, all of us, to know that all of our words are surrounded with sacredness. Everything we say to everyone is surrounded with sacredness. All of our words are elevated in the teaching of Jesus. Not just those made with certain religious phrasing. Words are not made more or less holy by attaching certain symbols to them. That's why Jesus makes directness and simplicity the measuring stick of how we communicate, how we speak. It's my ungarnished speech that shows my relationship with Jesus. My ungarnished speech that shows my relationship with Jesus. It's by my careless words that I will be judged. Look again at Matthew 12:35-37. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good. It's not complicated. The evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, okay, now we're listening, right? The day of judgment. People will give account of every careless word that they speak. By your words you'll be justified, by your words will be condemned. I don't have a problem thinking of adultery as being something that I'd be judged for on Judgment Day. I do have it presses me a little bit when Jesus says, Don, your careless words, they get remembered on Judgment Day. 4, I knew we'd have to look at this. May a Christian make an oath? The answer arises out of Jesus' words in 33-37, where he says, again, you have heard that it is said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for that's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for that's the city of the great king. Do not take an oath by your head. You can't not make one hair white or black. I can prove that to you. Although I know a lot of women in this church who have been doing this. Never mind. Do not take an oath by your head. You cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Yet there are all sorts of situations where Christians make oaths and take oaths. What should a Christian do if he's called upon to take an oath in a court of law? We make vows at weddings. We sign legal documents requiring a notary official of some kind. Certified declaration, that's an oath of truthfulness. And it's troubled a lot of Christians for a long time. What do we say to these things? First, what Jesus is doing, Jesus forbids making oaths in an effort to set one level of speech above others. I've dealt with that at length. You've got it in your notes. Second, when Jesus himself was asked to take an oath, he did. Matthew 22, 62 to 64. This is at the trial of Jesus. And then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ." "Yes," Jesus says. "It is as you say." So, what we learn here, there seems to be a difference between a Christian making oaths in personal relationships to somehow get away from honoring his speech with someone or deceiving someone else. It's in personal relationships. Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But there seems to be this difference between a Christian making oaths, swearing that he's telling the truth, when he's dealing with ordinary relationships, ordinary people. Oaths taken in ordinary conversation can easily be used to create the impression that ordinary words and statements and promises made without a certain phrase or a certain formula, that they aren't as important. So that's using vows and oaths the way Jesus condemned in the Pharisees, to create loopholes, like unjust weights. But there are other kinds of oaths. If others in legal authority require me to take an oath, I think the Christian can respond with simplicity and directness, recognizing that all of his speech is uttered before God every day. Jesus said, "You render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." And I think there's a proper distinction found in remembering that the Sermon on the Mount deals with the personal life and personal conversations of the disciple, while other passages of Scripture, Romans 13, deal with the role of the believer in public and civic affairs. The two things aren't the same. Jesus is condemning me using particular phrases carefully in my conversations with people every day in my private life so that I don't always have to tell the truth. That's what he's condemning. When he was asked to take an oath in court, he did. There's two different things. There's two different things being talked about. I thought the best way to sum this up would be James. There's nobody in the New Testament that talks about our words more than James, the brother of Jesus. James 3, and I'm going to read 12 verses. "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways." He's writing to Christians. "If anyone does not stumble in what he says," now think about what Jesus was talking about with oaths, using them to make some things count and other things not count at all. "If anyone does not stumble in what he says, let your yes be yes, your no be no. He's a perfect man. And he's able to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at ships. You see what he's doing here? Look at ships also. They're so big, so large, driven by strong winds. They're guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. Now he's applying. So also the tongue, small member, boasts great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. You might think he's exaggerating. And the tongue is a fire. He repeats it. A world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. I wouldn't even write that. And that's what James, the brother of Jesus, that's what he says. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea creature can be tamed, has been tamed by mankind. No human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil. Think about Jesus. Keep thinking about Jesus. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Anything more than this, he says, comes of evil. It's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing, oaths and different levels, and sometimes true and sometimes false, and hiding the truth from people. All of that stuff. My brothers and sisters, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. So again, you see what James is doing? He's doing what Jesus is doing, but in more detail. There's the two kinds of speech. Blessing, cursing, right? Jesus is talking about truth, lies. The two kinds of speech coming from the same mouth. That's what James is against. That's what Jesus is preaching against. There's supposed to be this divine consistency so that all of our words are of one piece. Our words, they should point to a redeemed heart. They should point to a redeemed heart. So, no, I don't think it's a sin to take an oath in court. I don't think it's a sin to sign a legal document, have to have it stamped. I'm telling the truth. I swear to tell the truth. I don't have any problem with that. I do have a problem when I'm in ordinary conversation with people and I find loopholes in what I say, so it doesn't have to be the whole truth. That's what Jesus is talking about.